Hey guys, Pastor Keith here from Oakdale Baptist Church in Nokesville, Virginia, and I'm here with this week's 3-minute sermon. Now, what is a 3-minute sermon? What I'm going to do is every week I'm going to post a video that will attempt to summarize and give you a snapshot picture of what we talked about this past Sunday in about 3 minutes. Now, I'm going to talk really fast because that is a lot to fit into 3 minutes, but hopefully you can get an idea of what we've talked about. Now, this will serve two purposes. One, if you missed a Sunday, if you missed this past Sunday, I want to bring you up to speed so that when you return this coming Sunday here with your church family, you know exactly what's going on and you're on the same page as everybody else as we continue to build on this series. The second purpose is a little bit of midweek encouragement. For those of you who were here on a Sunday, a little reminder of what you learned, what we talked about, so that we continue to marinate and meditate on what God is trying to teach us and trying to teach us as a church body here at Oakdale. With that being said, let's get into it. Again, we are in a series called Postcards From James. We're working through the book of James in the New Testament, and we've worked through the first 11 verses. This past week, we focused mostly on verse 2 to 11, so that's what we're talking about. And I believe that James is giving us some practical wisdom here in how to deal with trials in our everyday life. And he gives us 3 imperative verbs that we kind of boiled it down to 3 words that if we remember these 3 words, we'll better be able to face trials in our lives. The very first one is count. That's found in verse 2. James says, "Count it all joy when you face trials of various kinds." And you know, this is difficult for us, and sometimes we take this out of context, that we think that as Christians, that must mean that when we face trials, when we face bad stuff in our lives, that we need to, despite it all, feel joy or pretend that it's joy or ignore the trial and just have joy. And that's not at all what James is saying here. He's saying that we need to attribute joy to our trials, and we can only do this by following these next steps that he gives us. You know, it's not just that if we try hard enough or pretend hard enough that those trials will turn into joy. That's not at all what he's saying. He's saying that if you follow these practical steps, then you will be able to attribute joy to your trials. And that first step, that next word that he gives us, is let. That's found in verse 4. He says, "Let steadfastness happen in our lives. Let it have its full effect." And, you know, this is important because we need to actually work at this. We need to allow steadfastness, or this idea of standing firm in the midst of trials, to be a part of our lives. We need to allow that to happen. It is natural for us to do whatever we can to get out of those trials and not actually walk through them. And I believe that God wants us to walk through our trials. James is trying to tell us here that we need to work through our trials, and this means patience. This means standing firm in the midst of our trials, in the midst of the garbage and chaos of life. We need to stand firm and allow steadfastness to happen in our lives. The next thing that we are told is in verse 5, and that word is ask. That if any of us lacks wisdom, if any of us lacks anything, we need to ask God for it. And you know, the cool thing is, and the reason we can attribute joy to our trials, is that God is at work. James says, "For you know, because you know that God is working these things for good in our lives." You know, sometimes when we look at trials, that's really hard to think of, that God is using this for good. But James reminds us here that we can count it all as joy. We can attribute joy to our trials because God is at work. He's trying to make us perfect, complete, so that we lack nothing. And if we do feel like we lack something, we need to ask Him for it. And that's how you get through trials. That's how you work through trials in your life, by counting it as joy. And we can only do that by letting steadfastness happen in our lives and asking God for that which we don't have. That is what we've looked at so far in the book of James. I hope you can join us this next coming Sunday as we continue to work through